When a respected judge was arrested over a baseless accusation, no one, not even the officer, realized it would become the spark to expose the rot within a biased system. The arrest, captured on countless cell phones, ignited a media firestorm and divided the city, forcing everyone to confront hard truths about race and justice. But what happened when the same officer found himself in the judge's courtroom would shock even the most seasoned skeptics. Let's start at the beginning. Officer Rick Daniels, a seasoned member of the Portland Police Department, navigated his usual downtown patrol with a mix of routine and unease. The city was a juxtaposition of bustling activity and simmering unrest, its vibrant culture often overshadowed by the weight of systemic issues and public discourse on racial inequality. As a 10-year veteran, Daniels found himself increasingly burdened by the dual pressures of maintaining order and addressing growing scrutiny of police conduct. Each encounter carried an undercurrent of tension, his actions constantly under the watchful eye of the public and his own conscience. On this particular day, the sharp sound of a store alarm shattered the late afternoon hum of the streets. Daniels immediately scanned his surroundings, his gaze landing on a black man in his 40s, walking briskly away from the vicinity. The man was dressed in casual clothes, his movements purposeful, yet unhurried. For Daniels, trained to look for potential threats, the man's presence triggered an assumption of guilt. Daniels approached swiftly, his authoritative stance evident. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. The man halted, his brow furrowing in confusion, but his demeanor calm. "Is there a reason you're stopping me, officer?" he asked, his tone steady but questioning. The question, while polite, seemed to challenge Daniels, who was already feeling the invisible weight of public scrutiny. "Identification," he demanded sharply, offering no explanation. The man's calm response, an appeal for reasoning, only deepened Daniels's suspicion, which was shaped more by preconceived notions than evidence. As the interaction escalated, onlookers began to gather, phones raised to capture the unfolding scene. The presence of the crowd heightened Daniels's sense of vulnerability. Driven by a mix of defensiveness and pressure to assert authority, he placed the man under arrest, handcuffing him on the spot. The man, though visibly startled, remained composed, his protests measured but persistent. His civility contrasted starkly with the officer's increasing rigidity, creating a tableau of tension that would soon ignite questions of justice and prejudice. At the police station, Officer Rick Daniels focused on the arrest paperwork, his pen moving methodically across the form. He avoided glancing toward the holding area, where the man he had detained sat quietly, his posture composed yet unyielding. The man's demeanor was neither confrontational nor submissive. It was a quiet assertion of dignity that unsettled Daniels in a way he couldn't explain. The air in the station shifted when the captain arrived. His steps hurried, and his face set with irritation. "Daniels," the captain called out, his tone sharp. "Do you realize who you've just arrested?" Daniels looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "No, sir," he replied, his voice cautious. The captain sighed heavily, pointing toward the holding area. "That's Judge Samuel Carter, from District Court." Daniels froze, the gravity of his error dawning on him. "A judge?" he managed to stammer, his grip on the clipboard tightening. Across the room, Carter observed the scene with the same composed demeanor he'd maintained throughout the ordeal. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable, yet there was an undeniable authority in his presence that commanded attention. Requesting a private conversation with the captain, Carter was soon ushered into a small office. Behind the closed door, he spoke with a calm yet resolute tone. "Captain," he began, I could demand disciplinary action against Officer Daniels. But this isn't about one mistake or even one officer. The issue runs deeper. What happened to me today is a reflection of a systemic problem that targets individuals without power or privilege. The captain, visibly uncomfortable, nodded as Carter continued. I carry the title of judge, which grants me protection most people don't have. But what about those who don't? They endure this treatment without recourse, and it perpetuates a cycle of mistrust and inequality. Carter's words landed heavily, their implications undeniable. He wasn't seeking vengeance or an apology. Instead, he was shining a light on a system that urgently needed reform. The captain promised to review the incident, but Carter's parting words lingered long after the door closed. Change doesn't come from avoiding hard truths. It comes from confronting them. The story of Judge Samuel Carter's arrest spread like wildfire through Portland, igniting fierce debates and exposing long-simmering tensions. News outlets eagerly seized on the incident, their headlines highlighting racial profiling and allegations of police misconduct. Footage from bystanders showed the stark contrast between Officer Daniels' stern, aggressive demeanor and Judge Carter's calm, yet resolute protests. The viral videos sparked outrage, with hashtags trending nationwide and commentary flooding social media. Public opinion splintered. Civil rights activists rallied around Carter, framing the incident as a textbook example of systemic racism. Protests sprang up outside the police department, demonstrators demanding reforms and accountability. Judge Carter was lucky his title protected him, one activist declared at a rally. Imagine how many others suffer in silence because they lack that privilege. Conversely, some Portland residents came to Officer Daniels' defense, citing the blaring store alarm as reasonable grounds for suspicion. He was just doing his job, one commentator argued online, echoing sentiments that framed the event as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than an act of bias. Amid the chaos, Judge Carter remained steadfast in his refusal to escalate the narrative into a spectacle. He declined interviews from major networks and avoided grandstanding. Speaking briefly to local reporters, he emphasized, "This isn't about humiliation or punishment. This is about ensuring no one, regardless of their title or status, is judged by their skin color alone. We need systemic change, not scapegoats." Portland's mayor, sensing the political gravity of the situation, called for a formal investigation. Within days, Officer Daniels was placed on administrative leave, pending its outcome. The officer, once confident in his role, found himself grappling with self-doubt and public scrutiny, his career hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, Judge Carter quietly channeled his energy into solutions. Working late into the nights, he drafted a comprehensive proposal for mandatory police training on implicit bias and community accountability. The document called for a transparent system to monitor police conduct, improved communication between law enforcement and marginalized communities, and a commitment to restorative practices. For Carter, this was not just about his own experience. It was about planting the seeds of a more equitable system for everyone. Weeks after his own arrest became a public flashpoint, Judge Samuel Carter found himself presiding over a case that carried an eerie familiarity. A young black man stood accused of shoplifting, his fate hinging on the testimony of the arresting officer, none other than Officer Rick Daniels. The courtroom was electric with tension, every seat filled with journalists, activists, and citizens eager to witness how Carter would navigate the trial. The defendant, 19-year-old Jamal Wright, sat silently at the defense table, his nervous glances betraying his fear. Daniels, now visibly subdued and far from his former confident self, testified to the events leading to Wright's arrest. Carter listened intently, his neutral expression masking the emotional undercurrents of the moment. As the trial unfolded, Carter's questions zeroed in on the assumptions that had shaped Daniels's actions. "Officer Daniels," Carter asked, his voice steady, "what led you to believe that Mr. Wright was attempting to steal? Did you see him take anything? Were there witnesses?" Daniels hesitated. "No, Your Honor," he admitted, but his behavior seemed suspicious. He was lingering near the exits, looking around nervously. Carter leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but firm. Suspicious behavior or nervousness, especially in a high-stress environment, can mean many things, officer. Did you consider other explanations, or were you guided by assumptions? Daniels shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Carter's gaze. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. By the trial's conclusion, the evidence presented was insufficient to substantiate the charges. Carter dismissed the case, his ruling an indictment not only of the weak prosecution, but of the systemic biases that had led to Wright's arrest. "Justice must be rooted in facts, not assumptions," Carter stated firmly. "We cannot afford to perpetuate a system where suspicion is too often tied to race." After the courtroom emptied, Daniels lingered, waiting for a moment with Carter. Approaching the bench, he said quietly, "I've been reflecting on my actions, Your Honor. I realize now how my biases have shaped my decisions. I want to change." Carter regarded him thoughtfully before replying, "Acknowledging the problem is the first step. It's not about being perfect, Officer Daniels. It's about being better." Daniels nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes as he walked away.